What is up, everybody? I'm back here today, and we have quite an interesting video. So I'm going to be talking about Joe Biden referencing Thomas Aquinas in a recent interview that is on CNN. And whether knowingly or unknowingly, Joe Biden actually tapped into two very important things in history and in philosophy. So first, he actually referenced Aquinas, and Aquinas is part of this very long debate about abortion and human ensoulment. And people, philosophers and theologians, have used Aquinas to try and say that he would support or at least be consistent with early term abortions. And this seems to be something that Joe Biden is picking up on. And then this is used to try to prove a contradiction within current Catholic teaching on abortion. And so you have really a tension between Thomas Aquinas, who is the church's kind of official philosopher, and who would seem to support some sort of early term abortion, at least according to one interpretation, and current Catholic moral teaching on abortion, which holds that abortion since conception is morally wrong. So Joe Biden seems to be picking up on this debate that stems really back to the Middle Ages. And also Joe Biden probably knows and is picking up on this reference, this implicit reference in Roe versus Wade. So actually in Roe versus Wade, Aquinas is implicitly referenced. So I'll let you go and search that, find that on your own. But basically there's a reference to philosophers, ancient or medieval philosophers in the case, and this is referring to Aquinas. So let's actually play the clip of Joe Biden talking, then we can discuss it and discuss this interpretation of Aquinas.
Mainstream religions have historically concluded that the existence of a human life and being is a question. Is it at the moment of conception? Is it 6 months? Is it 6 weeks? Is it quickening like Aquinas argued? I mean, so the idea that we're going to make a judgment that is going to say that no one can make the judgment to choose to abort a child based on a decision by the Supreme Court, I think goes way overboard.
Thank you guys.
The midterm.
So as you can see, Joe Biden provides what we can reconstruct his words into an argument. It's pretty weak, and it seems to be something like, because religious traditions, such as the Catholic one, are in dispute as to when the human person or soul begins or is infused into the body, we therefore cannot make a judgment on it, and therefore abortion cannot be legislated to be immoral, or it cannot be said to be immoral or legislated to be illegal. That's an awful non sequitur, pretty crappy argument. But we can be really charitable here to Joe Biden, and I think that's what we should do in our work, is we should be charitable and try to give the opponent or the interlocutor the best possible argument. So let's actually reconstruct this argument, and let's go back to Aquinas' words, because I really want to focus on what Aquinas is saying here, and Biden did reference Aquinas in the argument, so that's what we're going to be focusing on. So we can construct an argument like this. Premise 1, murder can only occur when there's a rational soul present. Premise 2, according to Aquinas, until 40 to 90 days after conception, there is no rational soul. Conclusion, Aquinas thus holds that until 40 to 90 days after conception, there cannot be murder. If there's no murder, then the termination of the fetus prior to those 40 to 90 days is not morally wrong. Conclusion, Aquinas would hold that abortions prior to that point of 40 to 90 days is not morally wrong. This 40 to 90 days number he's getting from Aristotle, who thought that the fetus was ensouled with a rational soul that makes it to be a human person or human being at 40 days for men or males and 90 days for girls. So really, we can then try to, if this argument works, try to derive some further views, maybe in support of maybe groups like Catholics for Choice, or people like Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden who claim to be Catholic. Maybe they can use an argument like this to advance some sort of political agenda, try to draw out contradictions in the Catholic faith, etc. And so really this is kind of the political motivation behind this argument. But I'm not too worried about that. What I am worried about is, in fact, whether Aquinas did hold this position. I think that we should investigate that. So let's do that, and let's do it in two stages. Let's do a prima facie or a surface level refutation, and then let's actually get into the exegesis of the text. So go back to that argument that I just stated, and you can see that premise 2 seems to be false. So premise 2, again, according to Aquinas, until 40 to 90 days after conception, there is no rational soul. So the rational soul really begins or is infused at 40 or 90 days, depending on if you're a male or a female. He's following after Aristotle here again. Now, Aquinas actually never says this in his writings. And I will please correct me if I'm wrong, because I do have to know this. But I am almost 100% confident that Aquinas never says this anywhere in his writings. And in fact, an article by Thomas Andrew Simmons, yeah, that's his name, Thomas Andrew Simmons, called Aquinas and Early Term Abortion, also says this. So it's not, there is some scholarly backing to my view. And so it seems that the more consistent approach, at least according to Simmons and the best research that I could do, is that Aquinas said and thought that at the very least, ensoulment takes place at the 40-day mark. At the very, that's the latest. And in fact, it could happen earlier, but we just know for sure that at 40 days, because of the movement the mother can feel in the womb, that ensoulment and animation of the fetus has occurred. So that right there would seem to be a surface level refutation of this argument. But let's go a little bit deeper here, and let's actually try to really see what Aquinas would think if he were here today. Would he be on the side of Joe Biden, or would he be trying to outlaw abortion, viewing it as morally impermissible? Where would he stand? So let's do this, and let's get into the weeds of the scholarly literature on this too. So the first thing you have to know really is that Aquinas never references abortion, or he does, but it only happens 3 times in passing in his work. So what I should say is he never gives a fully systematic, worked out account of abortion. And so I'm going to put a document in the link below, which you can read. It's kind of like a transcript of this, roughly, and it has all these citations to Aquinas, Aristotle, and the secondary lit that I've been using. So you can go and see where Aquinas actually references abortion, but it only occurs 3 times, and he never gives out a worked out kind of view. So really, what I think we should do then is, because he never gives a worked out view, we have to go to his metaphysical and biological principles and try to construct one out of those and see what in fact he would be led to based upon those principles. So let's do that. So now I want to turn to Aquinas on generation of humans, and then we can turn to interpretation and kind of get a conclusion from there. So let's understand this. Aquinas, again, Middle Ages, he was in the 1200s. And so he's going to be holding to a view of embryology and human generation that is a bit outdated. And he's going to be following after Aristotle, specifically Aristotle's work on the generation of animals. So let's kind of break this down. So taking after Aristotle, Aquinas thought that the male provided what is called the efficient cause, and the female provided the material cause in human generation. And the account goes something like this, and pay close attention because this is very important for interpreting Aquinas. Because if you don't understand this, you won't understand where I go and how I come to my conclusion. So, following after Aristotle, here's how it goes. You have the semen, which mixes with menstrual blood. But, according to both of these thinkers, the semen and menstrual blood are not what we know of them today. In fact, the semen has what is called an animal spirit or an active power. And the menstrual blood is just pure disorganized material. We know today that has a lot of genetic information. I'll touch on that in a minute. But for Aquinas, he thought that you had an active principle in the semen, which the father works through, and you have just pure material, disorganized blob of material that's called the menstrual blood. And the semen mixes with the menstrual blood and produces, over a period of weeks, different gradations or levels of material. So it starts with sensory material, with a sensory body and a sensory soul, then moves to an animal material and animal soul, And then finally it achieves or is organized, the active principle in the semen organizes the menstrual blood into a human body, which is then ensouled or infused with a rational soul by God. And that again happens around 40 to 90-ish days, according to Thomas. So to quote him, here's what he says. And after the sensitive soul, by the power of the active principle in the semen, has been produced in one of the principal parts of the thing generated, the sensitive soul of the offspring begins to work toward the perfection of its own body by nourishment and growth. The active power which was in the semen ceases to exist when the semen is dissolved and the spirit vanishes. So after you have this, after you have a body at a certain level, the active power goes away, and then you have ensoulment. So once the material is sufficiently developed, once the menstrual blood or material is sufficiently developed by the active power in the semen, it is ready to take on this rational soul. And then God infuses it with this rational soul. So to say this one more time because it's crucial, this ensoulment, this infusing of the rational soul, can only occur when the matter or the material is sufficiently developed enough to receive that rational soul. You have to understand that. Now, Aquinas thinks that this development, again, is gradual. You have a gradual process up to that development point when the material can, in fact, receive the rational soul, which then makes this thing a human being or a human person. So, let's put this all together one more time very concisely, and then we're going to do some interpretation here. What you get is this. The human is formed through the mixing of the semen with its active principle and the menstrual blood. Okay? This process is gradual because of the very low organizational status of the menstrual blood and the necessity of traversing various forms and organization. So consider, first, the active power creates a body out of the menstrual blood with the substantial form of the sensory soul. Then the active power creates a body with the substantial form of the animal soul. And then finally, a body with the substantial form that is infused by God of the rational soul. And the active power drops away, and you have the human, which then develops as we know. So, at this final point, with its infusion of the rational soul, and only then can we say that the fetus is an ensouled human. And then it would be, at that point and after, homicide to kill it. So prior to that point of ensoulment, people or interpreters of Aquinas would think that abortion is permissible. Now, Catholic teaching on that is a bit different, and maybe I'll touch on that at the end. But the basic idea is that all these interpreters in the Middle Ages did hold that there's a point of ensoulment. After that ensoulment, it's homicide. Before that, it's destruction of life, but they're both sins. And they're both morally wrong. But that's different because we're just talking about Aquinas in these and some interpretations here. So, we get to an interpretive difficulty right now, though. Exactly, let me say this one more time. To have a rational soul infused by God, one needs to have certain sufficiently developed material conditions that allow for the soul to be present. So we're going to go back to that picture of embryology and development that I just gave. To have a rational soul, you got to have a sufficiently developed body. But what exactly does this mean? So Robert Pasnow, a Thomist interpreter, thinks that the soul is not infused until the brain is fully developed. And John Haldane actually thinks that it is infused much closer to conception. So let's isolate these two views. For view number one, which is Pasnow's view, what is necessary for ensoulment is the presence of the actual organs sufficiently developed to support the operations proper to that species. So again, what is necessary for ensoulment is the presence of the actual organs, so like the brain, the heart, etc., sufficiently developed to support the operations, i.e. living, proper to this human species. So on this view, what you have is that in order to be ensouled, and in order to be a person, and in order to say that abortion is homicide, the fetus has to have actual developed organs. And in the second view, What is necessary for ensoulment is the material organization sufficient for the development of those organs, or the primordia of the organs that support the operations proper to the species. So basically something like DNA, or the very first genesis of those organs. Now, the debate over Aquinas, and consequently the political interpretation of him, hinges upon these principles. So if Aquinas holds to something like principle number 1, or view number 1, where ensoulment occurs only when actual organs are present, then he would have no problem with these early term abortions. But if Aquinas holds to something like principle or view number 2, where all we have to have are the material organization, or the primordia of this material organization of the organs, such as DNA or something, then he would in fact be completely consistent and in support of contemporary Catholic teaching that abortion is wrong since conception. So we have to understand, or we have to try to figure out what Aquinas would do today. Would he support principle or view 1 or number 2? And that's going to give us our answer to Aquinas, and that's going to give us our kind of refutation or affirmation of Joe Biden and contemporary people who are using Aquinas to support a sort of early term abortion view. So here's my argument. I think that there are a few problems with attributing principle number 1 to Aquinas. So the first problem is that it seems to lead to the absurd result that newborns and children 1 to 2 years old, and perhaps even later, wouldn't have rational souls yet because their brains and their organs aren't fully developed. In fact, your brain doesn't really develop, as I'm sure you know, until your 20s. So maybe you could make an argument that you don't, on this view, principle 1 or view 1, you don't even have a rational soul until then. But needless to say, Aquinas certainly would have not held something like this. It seems a little bit too far. And second, we know that Aquinas thought that at the least the rational soul was present at 40 or 90 days. But biology was probably advanced enough at the time for him to know that the fetus didn't have rational thought, and that it could not survive on its own at that time outside of the womb, and that the organs were not fully developed. So it would seem that Aquinas probably held the position that it is the beginning or the genesis of the rational organs that allows for ensoulment. Now, third, we can show that if he were here today, Aquinas certainly would not hold to principle 1. Going back to his view on embryology, Aquinas was wrong to hold that 1, the male is the sole active power through the animal spirits in the semen; 2, that the menstrual blood has no perfection or organization; 3, that the process of formation of the menstrual blood into the human body was a long process; and 4, that the active power in the semen remains until the time that the organs are present. He was wrong in that because of the outdated embryology. Our current embryology shows that once the sperm and the ovum are joined together, all the material for the formation of the organs is present, and that there is no need to claim that an active principle needs time to form the material into a human body in successive stages, as Aquinas thought, following Aristotle. The body is already all there in its DNA. There is no successive stage from sensitive to animal to rational in the material organization. It's pure human from the get-go in the material constitution. Aquinas thought that this rational soul was not present prior to ensoulment, prior to the material, the active power in the semen organizing the menstrual blood into a human material, because there was not sufficient human body yet. And this was based on his reading, again, of Aristotle's theory of generation. But since we can now show that generation does not occur this way, and in fact occurs from strictly human material fully present from the beginning, Aquinas would probably not hold to view 1. And this is in fact, I think, sufficient to say that Aquinas would not, I think all these three considerations are sufficient to say that Aquinas would hold to, at least not hold to principle 1. And probably he would hold to something like principle 2. So, in order to make that leap and say that Aquinas would hold to principle 2, we have to make 2 assumptions here. So 1, Aquinas probably knew that the fetus could not survive outside of the womb at 40 to 90 days, and that, in fact, the fetus it had organs that were not fully developed. and 2, that the fetus could not yet exercise rational thought, but only that the very beginnings of the organs were there, and eventually the fetus would be able to exercise rational thought. Yet, he still held that ensoulment took place around this time. And based on this, we can kind of speculate with high probability that Aquinas held to the view that ensoulment occurs at the genesis of these rational organs. And this is totally consistent with Catholic teaching. In fact, this, with its updated embryology, seems to provide some strong evidence that Aquinas would see the beginning of the rational soul, or the ensoulment of the human person at conception, where the very genesis of all of the rational organs are present. So, for this reason, I don't see Biden's argument and contemporary arguments having much stock, and I don't think that they are correct. I think that Aquinas, if he were here today, based upon these considerations given, would hold to the position or the view that since conception, when the sperm and the egg are joined together, there is the primordia of all of the rational organs, and because of that, there is in fact ensoulment since conception. Feel free to disagree, let me know, but that is my current interpretation of Thomas, and I think at the very least I have shown that Thomas, whether or not he's correct about that, certainly wouldn't support the view that early stage abortions are permitted, especially in light of a sort of modern embryology. And again, check out the link in the video description below and let me know what you all think. Thanks for watching.